Well, it's already been a year since Iran struck a deal with world powers over its nuclear program. Now, Iran agreed to curb its nuclear activities in return for the easing of international sanctions. The agreement was supposed to make the world safer and Iran more prosperous. There are signs of progress, but for many Iranians, it's just not enough. Here's Amin Daban in Tehran.
It has been a year since the historical nuclear deal between Iran and 6 world powers has been signed. A year ago, there was massive celebrations in the streets of Tehran in hopes of change and opening up to the world. The Rouhani administration had promised the people of Iran a better economy. Right now, the negotiating team are mentioning that their expectations have been lifted too much and more than reality.
One of the main obstacles is the trust, gaining the trust of the foreign society, foreign politics.
All of Iranians are sure that they are hopeful for the future.
In the past 6 months since the implementing of the deal, there has been a rush of delegations visiting Iran and signing agreements, but nothing has changed that much, as the banks are still cautious on dealing with Iran. So we'll have to wait for the US presidential elections to happen to see where the deal will go.
Well, it's important to note that not all sanctions were lifted, of course. US banks are still forbidden from working with Iran, and the US prevents Iran from doing business in US dollars. On the other hand, Iran resumed selling its oil on the international market and is making many more international deals. Bit of a mixed picture then, as André-Pierre Duplessis reports.
1 year ago, the United States and 5 other world powers reached a landmark deal with Iran. Tehran was promised a return to economic prosperity after years of crippling sanctions in exchange for curbing its nuclear program. Multinational corporations and governments started lining up to do business with this untapped market of 80 million people.
We're gathered here to talk to you about the economy and about increasing our relations with France to be able to work with renewed energy, with more determination in the context of Iran's politics of today.
After decades of isolation from international trade, Iran needed everything from big-ticket items like aircraft, cars, and equipment for its oil industry to medicine, toiletries, and even bull semen to boost its dairy industry. But 1 year after the deal was struck, and more than 6 months after sanctions were lifted, are the Iranian people reaping the economic rewards they were promised? The oil industry is one sector that's seen solid progress. Oil exports have nearly doubled since January, but its low price has made these exports less lucrative. There have also been some flagship foreign investment deals worth around $50 billion in total. These include a deal with French carmaker Peugeot to produce 100,000 vehicles a year in Iran, and a $19 billion deal with Airbus to renovate Iran's aging air fleet. But economic progress has been far slower than many in Iran had hoped. Unemployment has risen slightly by 0.4% in the last year. Some sanctions are still in place, and many international companies are reluctant to do business with Iran until they have more reassurances. US lawmakers, meanwhile, are continuing to block business deals, and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has responded with his own threat.
In some fields, including banking, we still haven't reached the level of transactions we were hoping for. If one day world powers refuse to keep to their commitments, we are ready and have the capability to roll back our nuclear program.
With a presidential election coming up in both Iran and the US in the coming year, the survival of the nuclear deal and its potential to raise living standards for Iranians still hangs in the balance. André-Pierre Duplessis, TRT World.
Okay, Professor Hooshang Amirahmadi is president and founder of the American-Iranian Council. He joins me via Skype from Princeton in New Jersey. Professor Amirahmadi, thank you for joining us on Money Talks. Let's just talk about some of these sanctions that are left over. They're incredibly important. Which 2 or 3 sanctions would you point to as standing in the way of Iranian progress right now?
Well, thank you for having me. First, from the American side, on almost 95% of the American sanctions on Iran are in place. Americans only lifted secondary sanctions related to nuclear programs of Iran, meaning sanctions on other countries, not on the US entities. So if you are a US entities, like myself, sanctions almost completely remain except for certain areas where either they are humanitarian or under licensed from the Treasury Department to be going forward. So again, unfortunately, from the U.S. side, sanction relief remains very illusionary. It's very little has happened. There are three things that are really are critical. One is banking. All international transactions that have to deal with dollar are not also allowed to happen with Iran. And unfortunately, again, dollar has a predominant position in international trade and finance, and therefore a lot of transactions that have to go through dollar are not allowed. Finally, there are certain areas of dollar transactions that Iran can deal with, and these are certain banks outside the United States that hold American dollars, which are not controlled by American Treasury Department. Let's say there are $1 billion in a bank in Russia. That money, if it is not controlled by American, which is usually not, that can be used to do transaction with Iran. And so unfortunately, because of the problem with the banking and dollar, Iran still continues to do its international transactions either on barter terms or through other currencies, as well as a certain black market operation.
Thank you so much for joining us on Money Talks and for your analysis.